Moment this morning, sitting reading a book to some of the elementary school children here as scheduled. Reporters asked him if he was aware of the situation in New York. He nodded a bit gravely and said he would have something to say about that shortly. We are expecting that statement any moment now. I can tell you here in Sarasota, with those traveling with the president, they are trying to sift through all of the amazing and terrifying both pictures and details as they can get them from New York City, but no confirmation here from White House officials about what this in fact is, whether it's accident or terrorism. They are trying to gather information as best they can, give it to the president, and trying to keep things on a very calm and even keel if possible.
And on that note, Major, it sounds like that exchange of questions with the president came at what would be a sensitive time if he was sitting in front of a bunch of school children and not wanting to scare the children.
Well, precisely. And the president has a way of letting reporters know that it's either an appropriate time or an inappropriate time to take questions. He does that in many different environments, many different situations. Clearly this morning with the crowd of children, he wanted to keep an even keel, keep the situation under control as best as possible. He just nodded and said, we'll talk about this later.
Right. So once again, we do expect to hear from the president soon. A time frame on that?
Within the next 10 minutes or so. Again, things are very much in flux. Things are a bit confused. The event here, which was scheduled to talk about education reform, talk about the importance of reading, that has been scrubbed, and the president is trying to gather whatever information, all the information he can from various White House sources, make a statement, and then get aboard Air Force One, get back to Washington just as soon as he can.
Major Garrett traveling with the president in Sarasota, Florida. Major, thank you very much. And of course, as soon as the president begins to speak, you'll see those comments live here on CNN. Leon.
I want to just inform you that we just gotten word, according to Reuters news service, trading on the markets in New York have been postponed indefinitely. And we will try to keep an eye on that, but can't expect that to happen, get underway anytime soon. But we just heard our Major Garrett mention moments ago this investigation. We're just now getting reports here, the Associated Press saying that U.S. officials are saying this is an act of terrorism. Let's go now to our David Enzor, who's on the phone right now, and give us some more information on what may be at stake there. David.
Well, Leon, I can just tell you that U.S. officials are also telling me that this is clearly not an accident in their view, and they do believe that terrorism is at the root of this. They believe this is a terrorist act. However, they have very little other information. Obviously, law enforcement agencies will be taking the lead on this, trying to find out who who was flying the planes, whether they had in fact been turned away from their regular flights, and so on. So very little information.
David, we're going to have to cut you off. President Bush is speaking.
A moment for America. I unfortunately will be going back to Washington after my remarks. Secretary of Rod Page and Lieutenant Governor will take the podium and discuss education. I do want to thank the folks here at Booker Elementary School for their hospitality. Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
Emotional President Bush there speaking in Sarasota, Florida, cutting short his stop there, saying that an apparent terrorist attack has occurred on U.S. soil. They're mentioning the 2 planes that have crashed into the World Trade Center this morning. He says a full-scale investigation is underway to hunt down those responsible for this, saying terrorism will not stand.
And Leon, on the heels of the president's remarks, CNN has learned that at least one of the planes involved in this hit on the World Trade Center was an American Airlines 767, a Boeing aircraft that took off from Boston. What happened to that airplane as it took off from Boston and how it ended up at the World Trade Center, our details will have to fill in as we go. But let's go ahead and bring in our David Enzor. David, you were saying before we interrupted you for the president's remarks.
Well, unfortunately, the amount of detail that the officials who are tracking this have is pretty sketchy at this point. But I was just saying that officials are calling this an act of terrorism. They're saying that's clearly what it is, clearly not an accident. And law enforcement agencies, the FBI and others, will be taking the lead on this, officials say. And clearly, obviously, they will first try to ascertain who did this. What nationality are they? What's behind this? That's really all I can say. There are several places around the government. There are groups of officials gathering and setting up crisis centers to try and deal with the flow of information on this, which, as you can imagine, is going to be considerable as the day progresses.
And so far, as far as we know, no one has been taking responsibility for this.
There have been no claims of responsibility, and U.S. intelligence officials say they had no warning of anything like this coming along.
All right, David Ensor, thank you for joining us on the phone. Once again, you can see that information at the bottom of your screen. 2 different planes have flown into the World Trade Center within the last hour. One plane was an American Airlines Boeing 767 from Boston. In terms of how many people were on board that plane and if it was forcibly taken from Boston into New York, we still have yet to learn.
We're joined now on the telephone by the former Federal Emergency Management Agency Director James Lee Witt. Director Witt, you're watching these pictures with us this morning. Your comments?
Well, it's just horrible. There's no doubt. I did see the one plane flying into the building. It's just unbelievable, something like this. But, we've been, for several years now, we've been working on terrorist-type events. And, and this is apparently one of those events. Do not know yet, but apparently it could be. And right now, I know I really feel for those families. But Richie and the New York Emergency Management, the state of New York, and I know they're very busy right now in the FBI and law enforcement. But this is one of those crisis management as well as a consequence management situation that they're going to have to be dealing with.
The first thing that calls to mind to many of us who have been here to cover these events was the World Trade Center bombing back in was it 96 when that bombing occurred?
Yes.
And you were director of FEMA at that particular time. Since then, has there been a plan put in place for something like this, to recover from this, or to go through the exercises necessary to get people out and to recover from it?
Well, they have a very good plan in place, and for even events, not as this. I don't think I don't know if they put a plan in place for airline crashing into it, but I know they take every scenario they could think of and try to deal with a plan that will help them respond in the most effective way. And we even practice airplanes flying into igloos, and at some of the arsenals around the United States. So you try to practice for everything you can think of and hope for the best, and that you can be able to respond and hope none of this happens. But
on that note, then, did you run any kinds of tests at all, or any kinds of theoretical tests or computer tests or anything on something like this?
We didn't. I'm not sure if New York City did. I'm sure they did. But you can't. How can you stop something like this without having an anti-aircraft gun sitting on top of buildings?
Yeah.
You just can't. You can prepare the best you can be, and that's all you can do. But I'm sure that they've got everything in place and doing. They always do an excellent job up there in New York.
Director James Lee Witt, former director of FEMA, we thank you very much for your time this morning. We may be talking with you later on.
As we continue our coverage, our Aaron Brown in New York City joining us now. Aaron, we can see over your left shoulder there the building still smoldering of the World Trade Center.
Well, it is a grotesque sight to look at from about 30 blocks away from where we are. For those of you just joining us, let's just briefly recap what we know. About an hour ago, about 8:45 Eastern Time, one plane crashed into the tower, the World Trade Center tower on the right, the first of those towers that you can see behind me. And then about a half hour later, a second plane crashed into the tower number 2. That's the one to the left, where the darker smoke is billowing out right now. We have reports, CNN has been told that one of the planes was an American Airlines 767 that had been hijacked from Boston. We don't know if that was the first or the second plane that hit the tower, but we We do know that it was a 767 American